Hi, I'm Aldi Meola, and welcome to DMX Brasil. I grew up in New Jersey, not so far from where my house is right now in New Jersey, in a town called Bergenfield, New Jersey. And I was really, really fortunate to have grown up there because it was proximity to New York City was a half an hour, maybe less. And I spent a lot of teen years going into the city, taking the bus, going to the George Washington Bridge, and then taking the subway all the way down to the Village. And Greenwich Village had just, the widest assortment of clubs and theaters and any kind of music you can imagine. And it was a very inspiring time. I would come home so often from the Village with a lot of inspiration from what I had heard. And in this particular town that I grew up in was very middle class, and it was a lot of Italian, it was a lot of German, it was a lot of Irish. The downtown was just a picturesque, perfect downtown with a wide array of stores and also record stores and a movie theater. And I would say it was a thriving middle class town, and it was just perfect to grow up in at that time. My sister, I have a 7-year older than I am sister, and so she was, the record buyer. When I was about 9 years old, she was the teenage girl that was going out buying a lot of the 45s, the hit songs, and then later the albums, the record album, vinyls. And, so I would get my taste of this music through her. And then there was one night that my parents had gone out, and my sister had a lot of friends over, and a couple of those friends brought over their Fender amps and their Stratocaster guitars, and that's when I had a chance to pick one up, and it was love at first touch. My childhood years, as early as I can remember, we were into instrumental bands like the Ventures, and then later, bands like the Beach Boys and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, everything coming out of Britain, everything coming out of LA or San Francisco in particular. I love the San Francisco sound as well, with the Grateful Dead and Quicksilver and Jefferson Airplane. And it was just an explosive decade. There was nothing like the 60s. I credit a lot of the creativity that happened then, and the fact that we had total focus, and it was a whole new generation that wanted to do something revolutionary, and that's what happened. I mean, there was no cell phones, no computers, so the focus was like totally on the music at that point. And I was really fortunate to grow up in the 60s and allow all of that to permeate. Then, when I was very young, probably 7 or 8, a lot of immigrant parents preferred that their child continue with the accordion. The accordion was the instrument of Europe a generation ago, and I remember that they pushed. If you were Jewish, if you were German, if you were Italian, if you were French, Polish, accordion was what parents would have hoped your child would play. Of course, it was pretty much considered a corny sounding instrument at the time. Now I happen to love it. But back then, the guitar was coming in. The electric guitar was becoming the new thing. And so I think I only took about 1 or 2 accordion lessons before I convinced my parents that I want to switch over to guitar. And at the local music shop, which is very close, walking distance from the house I grew up in, I was assigned this wonderful teacher. He happened to have been a jazz enthusiast, old school jazz, but he was also okay with teaching the more modern approaches of music. And so right away I was learning how to read. I was learning chord substitutions and scales. And we both remained friends for a very, very long amount of decades, Well, then later, like a year or two later, I ventured into the city a lot with my high school buddies, and we went to the place called, which was like, to me, it was like school. It was we went to the Fillmore East, and the Fillmore East was prior to that it was a Jewish theater, and then it got converted into a rock and roll kind of venue, and Bill Graham was the promoter and really the impresario that introduced and brought over a lot of British bands to play there, and became the place that I would venture to at least once a week, and saw some of the best shows you can imagine, from The Who down to Jimi Hendrix and all of those great groups, Jethro Tull. Oh, I knew when I was very young. I mean, as a very young teenager, I already knew that I wanted to make it in music when I'm young. That was my goal. Was not wait till I'm 30 or 40, but I wanted to get into the scene at a very young age, and that's exactly what happened. I really had a drive that was kind of unexplainable. My first band, well, you get your feet wet. You usually, when you're a young kid, you hopefully hook up with some local guys in school that also play, and you wind up in somebody's garage somewhere, and you start putting songs together that might be currently hit songs on the radio, like exactly what we did. At the time, we might have played some Stones, and at the same time, I'm taking lessons from this teacher who's a jazz instructor. So I was getting the best of both worlds. I was learning how to play different scales and different chord forms, but at the same time, my liking towards music was more in the rock dimension. Well, then I think there was a period of my mid-teen years that I discovered Miles Davis, and what I liked about Miles, because I didn't start off with liking hardcore bop music or anything like that. So when Miles basically let's say invented fusion music by having Chick Corea and the band, and John McLaughlin and Billy Cobham and all these guys, Joe Zawinul. So before they all spun off, they were involved with Miles, and then I was looking at other artists, especially guitar players that were considered jazz rock or fusion, kind of stylist. And Larry was really kind of the first guy. I would say I would give him the Godfather credit, of that whole idiom. And so I went to see him quite often in the Village, and struck up a friendship, and then I think there was one or two lessons that I managed to convince him that I would love to take with him. So I remember going out to his farm that he had out in Pennsylvania, and we remained friends till the day he passed, and he was a great guy all the way around. And then another group that I discovered was the first Return to Forever. Was more like a Latin Brazilian jazz group with Joe Farrell and Flora Purim and Airto from Airto was amazing, and Stanley, and we saw them at the Village Vanguard, and the very famous jazz club in the Village, and I was a big fan of that early music. And then it was only a year or two later, I think it was when I had just started to go to Berklee School of Music in Boston, that Chick got influenced by seeing Mahavishnu Orchestra and the power and the electric excitement of that band, and so he then changed his whole course from a light-sounding Brazilian music to this kind of rock-edged fusion group, and that's how I got that gig. Well, I got the gig because I was really a replacement for the second guitarist that they had, someone who was really not an electric guitarist. So I was at Berklee School of Music at the time, and I'd seen the band both with their first guitarist, who was wonderful, and then I saw the band a second time with Earl Klug, who's a great acoustic player, but never known to be an electric player. So I had made a mention to a friend of mine back in New Jersey who was like this Woodstock hippie guy, Michael, and he was like my big brother, and always took a great liking to my playing. And well, first I called him up and I told him about the show and how, boy, I wish Michael, I wish I could play with this band. I would be perfect, because I had the Les Paul and I had that kind of sound for that. And he took it upon himself to take a tape that he had made of me playing with the Barry Miles Quartet on a New Year's Eve. And on that New Year's Eve, he slipped me a tab of acid. And I was totally not a drug guy, but he just said, trust me, you'll love it. So I took this tab of acid, and I remember I was tripping like you can't imagine. And this tape is the tape that he brought to Chick and the management in New York City and bugged them like you can't imagine to listen to this tape. So I think at the same time, Chick and his management were really considering getting a guy who was more electric guitar oriented, and the timing was just perfect. So they heard the tape. I get this call soon thereafter from Chick while I was up in my apartment in Boston at Berklee, and he said, "Is this Al Di Meola?" I said, "Yes." He said, I just heard a tape that your friend Mike brought into the city, and we're knocked out with the tape, and we'd love for you to come down to New York and join the band. It was as simple as that, not even an audition. I remember he said, join the band. And I was like, wow. I mean, it was, Return to Forever was my favorite band. So this was like a dream come true. And I remember I came home where my parents lived in New Jersey, and right away they were like, what are you doing home from school? I said, well, Mom, you won't believe this, but I'm playing Carnegie Hall on Tuesday night. And so my father in the background said, oh, you're not playing Carnegie Hall. Come on, no. I said, Dad, it's not a joke. I'm playing Carnegie Hall with Chick Corea. And he goes, who's Chick Corea? So this turned into what was really like a surreal moment in life, because that was the beginning of my career at 19 years old. And that tour that began at Carnegie Hall took us to all different types of venues to the United States for 3 weeks. Some stadiums that were part of the Newport Jazz Festival, some clubs, some theaters. And then we wound up, after the 3 weeks of breaking in this new music, that was to be the first record with myself and Return to Forever. We went into a studio called the Record Plant, a very popular studio, and in the next room was John Lennon. So I was, the Beatles, of course, were my favorite group growing up. So here I was in, a state of like enlightenment and delight. It's just something, when I look back on it, it's almost hard to believe that it happened, but it's, I haven't stopped. Well, I showed up at the rehearsal. I was 19. I first went home to New Jersey, and I explained to my parents. I said, I think they went 2 or 3 rehearsals. And when I walked into this rehearsal facility, somewhere in, I think it was in the 30s, 30th Street in Manhattan. I forget the name of the place. And, of course I was nervous beyond belief, And, but I knew how to read music, and that was the key, because a lot of the music involved reading, charts that could have been as long as 10 pages, and all the music was new. But it was very, very soon, as I began playing, very soon, I heard like little quibs from like Lenny and Stanley that they liked what I was doing. In fact, Lenny really liked what I was doing on one of his pieces that had kind of a funk thing happening. And all of a sudden, these guys are warming up to me. And I knew that I wasn't yet ready. I felt like a fish out of water, So I just knew that I had to grow, and that I was given the position of a great opportunity, and it's like God passed me the ball. Now I got to run with it and really make this happen, So my whole life was devoted with practicing, and that's it. And nothing more. I really just wanted to do as good as possible and earn my position in the band, I had the charts, so I would wake up and I'd practice, and it wasn't like I had this other life where I was going out having a good time. This was it. This was my favorite band, and I had the most important guitar chair in the world. That was the most important guitar chair. Chick Corea, who, always was recognized for me as one of the greatest pianists, improvisationalists, but also composer, and he was really thinking in that period of writing with the electric guitar being sort of like the front man instrument. So I had a very important role in that particular type of band. It just, my influences of everything that I liked growing up. It could have been, starting with, the Beatles being one of the best of that particular generation, and then coming up through my teenage years, and then getting acquainted with all of the jazz and jazz rock artists that took it to another level, whether it be Larry Coryell, Chick Corea, McLaughlin, all of that, and then later collaborating with the flamenco guitarist Paco de Lucia, and then I would say there was another very pivotal moment in my career when I met and collaborated a little bit with Astor Piazzolla, especially as a friend, but being introduced to his music really changed my thought process and how to compose. And it was because of all of these people that I mentioned that I developed into what I am as a composer, I would say. The first solo album, Return to Forever, at that time was riding very, very high, and we had just signed with Columbia Records. So this is after doing 2 records with Polydor. We got this big contract with Columbia Records, and they wanted to sign me as a solo artist the same day, which they did. So in one day I signed 2 contracts, and I'll never forget going home to my parents' house and showing my dad these 2 checks, because he just couldn't believe it that I'd make it in the business before I even hit 20. I had so many people on that album. It was a very vibrant time, and Return to Forever was so popular. There was 3 bands that spearheaded and pioneered a whole new movement, and those were Weather Report, for sure, Mahavishnu, which was almost ending at that point, but that was one of the big ones, and Return to Forever, which I always looked at as, that was the compositional band. It was really a lot of composition. So those 3 bands were playing big rock audiences all over the world. And, so I think I had a lot of, leeway and a lot of, let's say, advantages because of playing in the band to attract people to play on the record. So in other words, on keyboards, I had Barry Miles, I had Chick played on the album and also contributed to the record. I had Steve Gadd, the greatest drummer alive. I had Alphonse Mouzon playing on it. Lenny also played on it. So I had three of the greatest drummers in that idiom. And I also had Jaco Pastorius, who, as I was told, is at the time, that was the first record he's ever played on. First time he's ever recorded in a studio. And still known to be the greatest bass player that ever lived. And Stanley, who was right at the top as well, was on the record. And Anthony Jackson, who was really my first pick, So I had three of the best bass players on the record as well, and it was one of those records that just I had more celebrities than other records. Jocko I knew about when I was in high school, and when we'd take our spring break, we would go down typically to Fort Lauderdale. And Jocko being from Fort Lauderdale, he had created this buzz in the whole area, between Fort Lauderdale and Miami, at Miami University. And then, people were just talking about this local guy that was mind-blowing. And so I knew about him long before other people in the Northeast knew about him. And somehow we met one another down there, and I invited him to play on my first album. And that led to him getting a gig with Blood, Sweat and Tears. So I recommended him to the drummer of Blood, Sweat and Tears. And then after that, of course, Weather Report. The breakup of RTF was sadly premature. It should not have broken up. We had just signed a multi-record contract with Columbia Records. And I think the band was getting so big, and it was really one of the only bands, by the way, that had a band contract, and also each individual in the band had a solo contract. And I think we just got bigger than Chick could imagine. And, I don't know, for whatever reason, Chick felt like he was losing some certain control, but I certainly didn't look at it that way. Chick was always, to me, the leader of the band. But then when he wanted, what I remember very well is that we all had to vote on his girlfriend at the time becoming a lead singer in the band, which really the band was not that type of band. It was really an instrumental, kind of a jazz rock all the way, with elements of classical. So there wasn't really room for a vocalist. That would have changed the whole dynamic of the band. So what happened was the management, who were Scientologists, and Chick Scientologist, Stanley Scientologist, Lenny not Scientologist, and me not Scientologist, we all voted no. And so that basically for Chick, that just, he just felt like, okay, I'm gonna break up the band. And that's what happened. So he actually attempted to hand the contract back, which Columbia wouldn't let him do that. So he then reformed the band with Gail, who became his wife, as lead vocalist of the band. But the band sounded completely different, and I think the fans didn't accept it at all, because it had a brass section and a vocalist, and it was like, where's the guitar? And so people were like, they were very confused. So that was a disappointment. And happily we did, later we did a couple of reunions in '83 and then one in 2008. Not long enough, but we did revive it a couple of times. Well, that started with my first tour of Return to Forever, playing Europe, and that was in 1974. And when we got to Spain, there was a lot of talk about this new sensation, flamenco sensation, Paco de Lucia. So a lot of talk about this new guy, Paco. And I had gone to a local record store and picked up maybe 2 or 3 of his records, and went back to New Jersey, and I heard something that I thought was highly unique. Something that was unconventional and definitely forward thinking. And I had a vision from then that it'd be cool someday, once I get up enough guts to play with somebody like this. And so it was on the planning of my second record, Elegant Gypsy, that I went to my product manager at the label, and I had asked him if he could contact RCA Records in Spain and see if they can get Paco to come over to New York. So as it turns out, because of at that time, my current popularity was that RCA thought that would be a good opportunity for Paco to get exposure in North America. And so, so then he came over to New York, not speaking any English, and He had an interpreter friend with him, and we put it down. Not the first day, but the second day, and it turned out to be a hit single. I mean, it was and the start of a further collaboration that involved John McLaughlin, and that led to a record that sold 7 million records called Friday Night in San Francisco. And now we have the Saturday Night in San Francisco coming out. So these are tapes that I've had for 40 some odd years that we restored. And so I found enough of material from the next night that's different than the material that's on the Friday night. And so it's going to be kind of a major release, in a sense, of a historic 2-day event. Prior to the acoustic projects I've done, I mean, at the very beginning, it was Chick's idea to do an acoustic set to break up, the show, and where everybody could just have a solo spot acoustically. And I was really like not at all prepared to play acoustic. It's a different feel. It's a different. I didn't even have a repertoire to play, but it was more the part within the show where you get to improvise something other than an electric guitar going through an amp. So it was something that I just developed, because out of Chick's, idea that we should have an acoustic set, and it turned out to be a right decision, because as the years went on, I thought that it's going to be more and more hard, especially a lot later on, to do electric music, just for a lot of different reasons. And acoustically, you have a lot more choices. So my success came, the biggest success acoustically came with Paco and John, and that opened up a big door in Europe to do a lot of other kinds of acoustic music, like my collaborations with musicians doing versions of Piazzolla's music and tango, and the audience for it in Europe was vibrant, and the rest of the world, they just loved this aspect. Maybe more so, I would say a lot more so, than the electric music. And so that's what I'm doing mostly today. Well, the tinnitus is something, tinnitus is the perception of ringing when there's no outside sound. Within my own head, I hear a high-pitched ringing, which not everybody is prone to getting. It's kind of a precondition, or a genetic disorder that could get turned on. It can get turned on with an explosion. It could get turned on with loud music. It could get turned on with certain kind of medications. And with some people, it can dissipate. I think a lot of people experience tinnitus if they go to a show where there's a lot of volume, and then maybe that night they have a lot of ringing in the ears for a day or so, and then it'll dissipate. But in my case, it's chronic, so it never changes. It's very, very, very loud, and it was in my case the result of the fact that genetically I was going to have it. And there were certain things that could kickstart it. Like I had at 7 years old, I had a head injury. I actually fell from a very high height from a tree. I was climbing a tree and I fell and fractured my skull. And I think if anyone hits their head on pavement, you're going to hear ringing. But in my case, it didn't go away. It wasn't very loud, but it was there. And then the years through, my teen years and my 20s and all, we played at excessive volumes, thinking that we were invincible. And the level of the ringing just increased more and more and more. And so it's at a point now where I just try to not involve myself and surround myself in situations that involve, decibels over 100 dB, If I go to shows, you have to remember to take some protection, But it's something we should all be more careful about, because it's really an awful thing to live with, you know. But I think, you know, musicians, this is what I say to everybody, I think all musicians suffer some loss of hearing, and that's a lot easier to deal with these days. But tinnitus, they haven't yet discovered a remedy for it. They're working on it. It's developed really well because I've had a lot of time to really go deep, and go deep meaning that I wasn't interrupted as often as I would have been had there not been the pandemic. And I would have had to, you know, in the past, pack, leave town, come back, try to pick up from where I left off. In this case, I had an uninterrupted amount of 2 years to really just go where my instinct was taking me. And so I think I've evolved, the music has evolved into a whole new category of composition on a level that I couldn't have done 45 years ago. So I say to audiences, it took me 45 years to get to this point, to be able to do this, and I just, you know, hope they like it, you know, because it's certainly not what I started out doing, but it's where I'm at now, and I think a lot of people do, from the reactions I'm getting, they're really digging it, you know. The Meola home events was a concept that we started in the summer of 2020 during the COVID crisis, and we were just relegated to staying home a lot because there was really not a lot happening outside of the home. So we had, as the summer progressed, we had a couple of friends come over, a couple of my very close friends, and I just offered to cook. They were out on the balcony, and I have some recipes that I've learned from when I was a child from my mom, who grew up in Italy, and I have my own take on these recipes. And so, you know, I turned to my wife and I said, you know, why don't we go live stream so people could watch me cook? She said, "You sure you want to do that?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" So in the middle of the process of me putting all of these foods together, people were kind of alarmed because they never imagined me doing such a thing. You know, a musician cooking and you know, showing it to the world. So I just, because I had a couple glasses of wine, I just made a comment like, and if you like, I could cook right here, and you can come here and I'll cook for you in person. And from that, we read all the comments. At the time I said it, I was only joking, but later that night, we read all the comments, and there were a lot of people that were very serious about, you know, wanting to know if I was serious about it. And then we looked at one another and we said, you know what, this could be something very unique, never done before, really, that I know of anyone in the music business. And maybe we could turn it into something really interesting where people can come here at around 6 o'clock, enjoy all of these different types of appetizers, Italian, of course, and all these different kinds of wines and champagnes and wide variety of everything. This is just some of it here right now. But we have, you know, we start with something that's like very expansive in terms of, you know, starting with the first course, and then we have a second course and a third course, and you know, we get to sit and talk before we sit down at the table for dinner. And then after that, we go down into the studio, and I begin to play like a private show. And then we also offered at the end of that a jam session or a lesson, which most people don't take, but they're just really satisfied with like a private show. And I got to play a lot of my new compositions that I was writing during that year, which now I have about 15 new compositions. So it was really a win-win, and the thing about it was highly unique, and it was almost like something we wish we could patent, because it was something that was I don't know if anyone ever thought of it before, but we didn't feel it was a big risk because we had also limited it to up to 2 people. And we had a certain distance and a certain protocol to feel safe about it. But it turned out to be something that we enjoy doing, and then at the same time can live with and talk about for many years. Oh, I went through a very heavy listening to people like Gismonti, who I still talk to every now and then. I think Gismonti was one of my big influences, as well as Milton Nascimento, supreme writing. I mean, all the way back to Jobim and Luis Bonfa, and I mean, it's just so. Brazil is. Whenever I talk about Brazil, I'm talking about a country that's so rich in culture, in music. It's vast, and there's so much of it. And a lot of Brazilian music was a tremendous influence on a lot of North American jazz musicians, for sure. I mean, all the way, between all the different sambas and bossa novas and all. But it was the writing and the harmonic movement and the beautiful melodies and the spirit of the music was very, very deep. So Brazil was a major contributor to a lot of what had inspired us up here for a lot of years and still does. There's a lot of phenomenal players now, more than ever, I think, on any given instrument. You can go online and discover a lot of unknown, or let's say musicians that have not yet developed a name for themselves, but are at an extremely high level. But record companies have fallen to the wayside. I mean, because of streaming, you don't have record stores anymore, so you don't have a lot of artist development happening like you did back in the 70s and the 80s, 60s, whatever. But there's no shortage of phenomenal musicians and talent out there. It's vast. It's more than ever, And in my period, there was like you would name in a handful of great guys, on any given instrument. But now it's bucket loads of great players across the board. Find them online. I mean, I don't know how easy it is for them to tour, because promoters will only promote names that they know to sell tickets. But you can go online and discover all these like young guys that are just killers. What they're doing, all over the place, and yeah. Well. Honestly, it's a mixed thing. The energy that it took to do this all of those years was something that no one can ever really know unless you've done it. It's hard. It's hard. The traveling part of it is really, really hard. The constant feeling of like that you have to do well, and it's never well enough. But it'll always bring us back, because once you get that applause, especially for something that you've written and that you feel close to, and that thing that you made, that you wrote, and you put your heart and soul into it, you feel that audience connected to that emotion, is what drives us. It's what brings you back. The satisfaction from that is like nothing else in life. It's what makes art the beautiful thing that it could be. It's everything. I mean, music for me speaks much louder and deeper than words. So if they can connect to this thing, and you could feel it when you're on stage if it's working, then it's the most satisfying thing. It's what keeps us going, regardless of all the logistical ends of traveling and problems that may ensue getting there and all that kind of stuff. It's the hardest part of the job, though. I always say is the rehearsing with other musicians to get your vision across, even if it's written out, but to get it, where it suits you, and if you're demanding, that's fine. That's that nothing wrong with being demanding. I mean, it's the way it is. My memories of playing in Brazil are always phenomenal because they're a very music-minded and very enthusiastic country for music, and they come from a long line of great musicians and tradition. And I remember playing the first Montreux Festival, and I was very honored to have played it. And I remember the warmth from the audience was something extraordinary. But it is a very special place. I mean, it's very, very different than other places. It's a very, very important country for music, and anything to do with Brazil. I'd love to come back.